I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I'm not here to negotiate, I'm here to pull off your masks. The masks of silence, of control, of selective outrage. I speak not for applause but because history demands it. The world watched, and Israel threatened my country's sovereignty like we were pawns in a game of empires. The deadline came, clear, unwavering. And what did Tel Aviv do? Nothing. For 72 hours, the world listened to the sound of diplomatic silence. No press conference. No statement. No shift in posture. Just a cold wall of arrogance pretending as if my words were a gust of wind, fleeting, forgettable. But what happened after that silence? No one saw it coming, not the pundits in Paris, not the analysts in Washington, and certainly not Netanyahu, who mistook dignity for weakness. Because when the clock ran out, I didn't raise my voice, I raised the stakes. And in that moment, the continent rose with me. Let's rewind to where it began, in Nairobi, at a summit that history will remember. I stood before leaders not as a rebel, not as a firebrand, but as the embodiment of a continent tired of being disrespected. I looked into the eyes of allies and adversaries alike and declared, within 72 hours, Israel will recognize Africa's right to form its own alliances without foreign interference, or we begin to sever every tie, every channel, every system that makes colonial arrogance profitable. This wasn't about one war. This wasn't about Gaza alone. This was about a mindset, a system that sees African nations as strategic tools, never as sovereign equals. We were no longer asking to be heard. We were commanding it. Yet Israel's response was to smirk behind closed doors. Their media called it a stunt. Western networks barely mentioned it. But while they dismissed it, Africa was listening. And when the clock struck midnight, the world watched as a black screen lit up from Ouagadougou. No national anthem. No decorative flags. Just a single man behind a single mic, a soldier, not for war, but for principle. My voice calm. My message clear. Since our calls have been ignored, I said, we will no longer participate in silence. And with that, I made 3 declarations, not threats, but realities. First, the immediate suspension of all Israeli economic involvement in Burkina Faso, from banking to telecom to arms deals. Second, the call for a new continental summit, 15 African nations invited to draft a unified alliance that no longer bends to external pressure or former colonial influence. And third, a diplomatic reckoning, urging every African state with Israeli embassies to reconsider, not with rage, but with integrity. Because no nation, no matter how armed, how rich, how connected, has the right to ignore a continent's voice. Our deadline, I said, was not a threat. It was a mirror. And now, the world must look. And look they did. Within hours, the dominoes began to fall. Chad, Mali, and Guinea recalled their ambassadors. Kenya paused a major Israeli infrastructure project. South Africa released a public statement, not just in support, but in admiration of the clarity, the courage, the calm fire. But what turned the tide wasn't in the boardrooms. It was in the streets. In Nairobi, in Dakar, in Dar es Salaam, young people flooded city squares. Some held signs, some held flags, but all held one idea: Africa will not be silenced. Their chants echoed across neighborhoods and digital platforms alike. Our deadline, our dignity. And suddenly, Netanyahu's government, once dismissive, scrambled. Emergency meetings in Jerusalem. No press allowed, but the walls leaked. A voice, allegedly Netanyahu's, recorded saying, "We underestimated him. This isn't just Burkina Faso anymore. This is a movement." And he was right. Because what I triggered wasn't chaos, it was clarity. I didn't spark hate. I unearthed a hunger for respect, for recognition, for realignment. Western officials issued vague statements. France called for restraint. The EU mumbled about dialogue. But none dared condemn. Not this time. Because what they felt wasn't political discomfort. It was fear. Fear of a continent no longer compliant. Of young Africans no longer apologizing for demanding equality. And now the question that keeps Netanyahu awake isn't about sanctions or deals. It's about momentum. How fast will this grow? How wide will it spread? Because when a deadline is ignored, the world doesn't rewind. It reconfigures. It moves forward, with or without you. And that's the real shift. We're not knocking on doors anymore. We're building our own. We're not asking for a seat at your table. We're flipping the table. To the youth watching this, I say, this is your era. This is your fight, not of bullets but of boundaries. Not of weapons but of will. To the leaders who still hide behind empty treaties and tired diplomacy, the masks are off. And to those who ask what I've started, I answer, I haven't started a war. I've ended a silence. Now the world must speak. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Was it courage or chaos? Vision or provocation? Let us know below. And if you felt the pulse of this story, if your blood stirred, if your breath caught, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us. Because this isn't just politics. This is power being redefined. This is history in motion.